Well, hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this October Dublin UX special. We're very pleased you can join us here again, streaming online from our homes to yours. I can't believe we're doing this again online. And you know what? I can't wait till we can do this in person. We will. We're planning events in 2022, but for now, this format works really, really well for us. We've got a great event lined up today. It's a little bit different to our usual events where we'd have 2 or 3 speakers. We're just going to keep it a bit tighter. We'll be listening to feedback. We're going to have one incredible speaker. Jon Yablonski is going to be speaking with us direct from the US. He's in Tennessee at the moment, and Jon is going to deliver a fascinating keynote around using psychology to design better products and services. And that is his book. Just getting into shot there. Laws of UX came out last year. We have copies of this book to give away, and everyone who's RSVP today and said, yes, I would like to win a copy. Hopefully you will win a copy. We're going to give away copies of this today. So again, you're very, very welcome to our event. And you know what? This is a very special event. This is actually our 50th event. Some of those have been pretty small, 20 people, some of them being very large, 40 people. Some of them like this are online where we can get about 400 or 500 people watching back on replay. But this is our 50th event in our 5-year history. And some of those events are now available on Dublin UX Rewind, which is our dedicated Rewind channel. We're constantly putting up new videos up there from our back catalog and of course some of the ones that we have hosted live online. The one that we just put up recently from Natalie was from mind mapping. Earlier on this year, we had an incredible event for World IA Day, which we're hoping to do again next year, and mind mapping is now available to replay on demand. Now, one of the key things about Dublin UX is having networking, and we are going to do networking at the end. We're going to use network@dublinux.ie. We tried it out earlier on this year, and it worked really, really well. So well, we're going to do it again. So at the end of the event today, we encourage everyone just to log on to network@dublinux.ie. You'll be presented with a screen that looks something like this. And there's different areas, and you can walk around, stumble around, and when 2 chat bubbles come together, it forms a safe bubble, and you can have a conversation. You'll hear and see each other. So we encourage you to network at the very end. During the event today, we do want you to engage with us. Please continue to use the chat. We are streaming on LinkedIn and we're streaming on YouTube. And at the moment, we're streaming on Twitter. So if you are watching on any of our platforms, just add us, just use the chat and we can see those comments. And we're also going to be using that for questions. So if there's any questions that you would like to ask Jon, please ask those questions and we'll bring them in at the end. If you would like to join me here on screen, number 1, please do. Number 2, if you do get selected, we'll give you a copy of Jon's book as well. So how do you join us on screen to ask a question? Just simply direct messages at Dublin_UX on Twitter. We'll follow up and we'll give you the link. We would love to see you live here on the stream later on today. So Jon is going to be keynoting ever so shortly. We'll bring Jon into the mix in a moment. And of course, we are very, very grateful to our sponsors today and partners, O'Reilly, who have given us a few copies of Jon's book to give away. So I really want to start today with a giveaway. Let's see if this works. We're going to go and see who is the first person to win a copy of Jon's book. Let's see. By the magic of technology, will this come in? No. Yes, there we are. Sarah, congratulations. You have a copy. I'll be reaching out to you in the next few hours to get your details. I will give you a copy of the book itself. Now, of course, community is so important to everything that we do here. And if we were face-to-face, we would be having a community moment and would be encouraging you to get up and talk in front of the room. Fortunately, it's not possible. So we do want to think about how we can support community and really look at the wider UX community and design community here across Ireland. And with that, I really want to bring in and draw focus to UX Belfast. And I'm going to invite Rick. Rick, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Patrick. How are you?
Very, very well. Thank you for joining us today. Number 1, you're very welcome to Dublin UX. This is your first one of our events for you to join. I've been watching your events for some time now. Do you want to tell us a little bit about UX Belfast and yeah, take us through some of the history? It's been going for a while.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick potted history.
Yeah.
So UX Belfast began life as UX Book Club Belfast back 2009, 2010, and the UX scene in Belfast was well behind the rest of the world, certainly well behind Dublin. There were only a handful of folks that were coming along to the meetings. Nobody really had UX in their job title. There were just like I say, a small group of us that were trying to work the user-centered process into our day-to-day work. So UX Book Club Belfast was maybe a dozen nerds sitting around discussing whatever the latest book was, and that continued for a few years. But we got into diminishing returns in terms of who was showing up. The agency that had started up front, they moved into product work. They got bought out by Monotype at the time, and they kind of handed over a lot of the community work that they were doing. I took over the book club in 2013. It went on a hiatus for about 18 months. And then in 2017, I rebooted it almost as kind of a more general meetup, but still based around books. So the book would set the theme for the meetup, and folks like Jon would be kind enough to come along and speak to us. But then to kind of retain the kind of local aspect, you know yourself, Patrick, once you go virtual, once you go online, the kind of local aspect of it is kind of lost. So we just make sure and feature local speakers as well, so that everyone gets a sense of what's going on across the whole design scene up north.
I think that's it. It continues to evolve, doesn't it? But at the same time, you want to keep it true to its roots, and I'm sure UX Belfast will continue to evolve. And you know what? You've got a great event lined up. Do you want to take us through some of the details of it?
I'd be happy to. Yes. So we've had very occasional meetups over lockdown, but we have our next coming up Monday the 18th of October, and generally the book that's selected sets the theme for the meetup overall. So we have Regine Gilbert, who's written this great book, Inclusive Design for a Digital World. She's New York-based educator, works in New York University. She's a designer, speaker, and author, obviously. And she's going to speak to us about the book, about her work. And then MT McCann, who's actually an ex-colleague of mine from a UX agency, Fathom, in Belfast. She moved over from agency work, a bit like myself, into the world of enterprise products. And she's put a huge focus on accessibility as part of her work. And I should also say that that's another great meetup in the north, which is Ladies That UX Belfast, which is another one of these kind of franchises, for want of a better word. MT started that up a few years ago, and she heads that up. So she'll be speaking to us as well. We'll be going for around an hour, maybe 75 minutes. Everyone welcome. Would love to see you there. If you head to uxbelfast.org, you'll get to the meetup page for sign up.
Fantastic. Do sign up. It's on Monday, the 18th of October, 6 p.m. And I think taking that angle of focusing on well-established authors, and especially doing it online, I think is definitely going to attract some great talent. You had Susan Weincheck recently, I believe.
Yeah, that was kind of the peak, I think, of everything I'd done with the meetup. You know, once you've spoken to Susan Weincheck, like, where do you go after that? So we kind of had a forced hiatus after that. There were a couple of guests couldn't make it, so that gave us a chance to kind of reset and think again about where to go with it. Or maybe give Don Norman a shout, see if he's free. I don't know, but
you never know.
But really, everyone's so generous with their time, and everyone is fascinating to listen to. So, and I'm sure it'll be no different this evening.
Fantastic. You're going to hang around with us, so we'll keep you on for a moment. So UX Belfast, very, very well done, and do sign up for the next event. Okay, what I do want to do is remind everyone you can continue to engage with us. Dublin _UX on Twitter. Do continue to type into our live chat feed throughout the event today. And I think we should hand it over to Jon. So let me bring Jon in. Jon, you are very, very welcome. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am Extremely excited about this, Jon. I've been following your work with interest for many months, if not years, at this stage. When your posters start making fame on Twitter, then I heard there was going to be a book, and I'm a subscriber to O'Reilly, the Safari bookshelf as it was, and I start getting like draft versions of it. You get like pre-release versions of it, and then it was released, and here it is. Proud moment, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a year in the making, but incredibly honored to, share it with the world and hear how much value it's provided UX practitioners. So yeah, very honored.
So. Yeah, I think it's really good. I'm so again happy that you've been able to take time. You're joining us from Tennessee. How's it been? Of course, you're working remote at the moment. How have you been finding working remote?
Embracing the advantages of remote employment. So yeah, being able to bounce around and visit family here at the moment in Tennessee. It's we're living in interesting times, so that kind of flexibility is it's nice.
I agree. It is. And you know what? And because of that flexibility, we get to have an event like today. And I'm really excited to hear your talk. I'm just going to hand it over to you because time is, of course, precious. And we do have time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions out there in the audience, please raise them. We'll bring them in at the end. We've got plenty of time to go through everything. So, Jon, I'm going to actually bring your materials on screen, and I will hand it over to you to take away. Thank you so much.
Excellent. So you should be able to see my first slide. Great. So I'm excited today to join you all. Thank you. I'm absolutely honored to, have the opportunity to share something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And that's, how designers can use psychology to build better products and services. So a little bit about me. I'm a multidisciplinary designer, speaker, writer, digital creator. My home base is right outside of Detroit, Michigan. And the kind of thing that I'm interested in as a designer is this kind of thing, not necessarily landscaping or urban planning, but really how designers kind of, shape environments and help people understand, the cues, the kind of the visual information, how to navigate environments and find the information they're looking for in order to achieve their goals. And this kind of interest in how people process the world and make decisions and how designers can potentially shape behavior really led to an interest in this overlap of psychology and design. And that was the premise of my book, Laws of UX, using psychology to design better products and services. I had the honor to work with O'Reilly Media and publish this book in April of last year. And it really kind of dives into this, really deep intersection of psychology and design, and really was the resource that I was looking for at a very important time in my career, where I wanted to know more about this intersection, but had a really hard time finding the information I was looking for online. It was either academic research papers or marketing blogs that only barely scratched the surface. So it was really an opportunity for me to build the resource I was looking for. And the book was just a much deeper, exploration of this topic. Today, what I want to do is share a few excerpts from the book. Some of my favorite principles that kind of, live in this intersection of psychology and design. The first one we'll talk about is Jacob's Law. Now, Jacob's Law states that users spend most of their time on other websites. And what this means is that users prefer your site to work the same as all the other sites they already know. Now, this was coined by Jacob Nielsen in 2000, and Jacob was specifically referring to the internet, the premier technology at the time. But it's not very hard to kind of zoom out and realize how this can affect really any digital experience. And the reason for that is because of the underlying psychology concept known as a mental model. So a mental model is what we think we know about a system, especially about how it works. It's how we use knowledge we already have from past experiences when we're interacting with something new. So this is very important because it's really how we train ourselves to use things, digital products specifically, but really any kind of experience, and really build upon pre-existing knowledge that we have to and apply that in this new context. So we if we go into a retail store, we're going to expect that retail store to be laid out very similar to retail stores we've been in the past. And the same thing applies to digital experiences and the kind of patterns and conventions that we deal with as designers. I give lots of examples in the book, but some of my favorites begin with this one, and which is essentially control panel toggles. So on the left, you'll see this is a very classic NASA control panel, adorned with toggles and switches and buttons and all the kind of controls that you would expect to find on a control panel. And if you were to compare that to the digital equivalent on the right, what you'll see here is form controls, right? Where the toggles and the switches and the buttons, they're similar, but they're different. They're in a digital context. In fact, the designers of these early web controls were really building upon pre-existing mental models that people already had of toggles and switches and, the kind of functionality that they afford. So, this is a great example of designers building upon a pre-existing mental model to make something new feel much more intuitive, much more familiar. Another really good example goes back, I like to call upon, is from the automotive industry. This happens to be from a Mercedes-Benz, and you can see here the seat controls are shaped in the actual form of the seat. Now, the designers of this vehicle could have easily have just arranged the buttons of the seat into like a horizontal row of uniform sized buttons. What they chose to do instead is actually shape the buttons in the form of the seat. And in the process of doing that, making the interaction with these buttons and the corresponding manipulation of the seat much more intuitive for people, because we already have a mental model of what a seat looks like and how it functions. So this is yet another example of designers building upon pre-existing mental models to make an experience that's been designed much more intuitive. And of course, last but not least, another example comes from the e-commerce world. So this happens to be a screenshot from the Etsy homepage, but it could really be practically any e-commerce platform, and that's because they all follow very, very similar patterns and conventions. So you have product tiles that feature what the product, feature the product, and then what the name of the product is, maybe the price, and even a rating. You have a shopping cart icon in the upper right-hand corner, and even the motif of a shopping cart icon is kind of a reference to grocery carts in the physical environment. So here you can see examples of designers building upon patterns and conventions that are very common in e-commerce platforms, and even kind of the symbology that we're familiar with from physical shopping retail environments. And really just doing this to make the experience much more intuitive and let the interface kind of get out of the way of the user and allow for them to more easily do what they came here to do to begin with, which is to buy product. Now, in the book, I like to draw a lot of design artifacts or exercises to these individual principles. And in the case of Jacob's Law, I think user personas are very valid here, because the frame of reference that personas help to define become very valuable for teams, because it helps us break out of that self-referential thinking and focus on the needs and goals of the user, which is actually more useful for prioritizing new features. So we've probably all been in design reviews or team reviews where someone says, I as a user would X, Y, or Z. And personas help us kind of break out of that self-referential thinking and really kind of put ourselves more in the context of the audience that's actually, or the customers that are actually using the products or services that we're designing. Okay, so that was Jacob's Law. The next one I want to talk about is probably one of my favorites, and that is the peak-end rule. The peak-end rule states that people judge an experience largely based on how they felt at its peak and at its end, rather than the total sum or average of every moment of the experience. Now, this is actually counterintuitive because you would expect people to kind of, experience something and then average that out in their mind to come up with a rating or how likely they were to recommend it to someone else or undergo that experience once again. But what people actually do is hone in on very specific points of an experience to really inform their judgment of that experience overall. And this is closely related to a concept or a principle in psychology known as cognitive bias, right? And the peak-end rule is actually a cognitive bias, which are really systematic errors of thinking or rationality and judgment that influence our perception of the world and our decision-making ability. You can almost think of them as shortcuts that increase our efficiency by enabling us to make quick decisions without the need to thoroughly analyze each and every situation. Scientists actually estimate that approximately 95% of our cognitive capacity is used making decisions on a subconscious level every single day. And we make thousands upon thousands of decisions. So most of those decisions we're making, we're not even aware that we're doing. And it's the cognitive biases that we have that are really kicking in and helping us get through the day and make these decisions. There's a really great study that was done by Daniel Kahneman and his associates called When More Pain is Preferred to Less, Adding a Better End. And this really highlighted the origins of cognitive bias in psychology. And in the study, Kahneman broke the participants of the study into two groups. The first trial, who were to stick their hands into cold water for approximately 30 seconds. And then a second group that stuck their hands in the same temperature water for the same amount of time, but then stuck their hands in slightly warmer water for an additional 30 seconds. And what Kahneman found here was quite surprising. It was actually the trial two, the group of people that had their hand in the water the longest, that actually thought more favorably upon the experience overall. And despite them having the most amount of discomfort by having their hand in the water the longest, what Kahneman was really able to kind of realize through subsequent repeats of this study through different variations was that people were locking in on a peak moment of the experience and then averaging that out against the ending of the experience, which was slightly more comfortable for the trial two people. And this is how this was really the origins of the peak-end rule. Now, if you were to draw upon examples from the digital space, there's lots of really good examples of this. And some of my favorite come from the email newsletter service, MailChimp. So on the left, you'll see that, if you've ever used the MailChimp service or created a newsletter, it can be quite stressful experience. There's no takebacks with email. So you're stressing about, every single spelling, potential error, if the information is accurate. And that once you send it out, that's it. MailChimp realizes this, and they introduced a little bit of their own brand. Here you can see Freddie, the chimp, their mascot. His finger hovers over a big red button. And they even kind of add a little bit of an Easter egg there. So the longer you wait, the more visibly nervous Freddie gets. And you start to see sweat roll down his finger. And this is really just MailChimp introducing a little bit of humor into this experience and kind of taking the edge off of a peak moment of using their service. And then fast forward to once you've actually sent the email, Freddie gives you a high five. In fact, it's a little bit of an Easter egg because you can continue to click Freddie's hand and he'll continue to give you high fives until his hand gets so red that he refuses to continue to high five. This is just an example of more brand humor that comes in at a very important moment of the experience. Now, of course, MailChimp isn't the only one that uses peak-end rule in their product, in their services. Uber's another really good example of this. And here pictured is the Uber Express pull app. And, Uber, what they did was realize that that waiting point, the time between when their customers have ordered their ride and their ride has actually arrived, tended to be the most painful point of the experience for people. So this is, not a big surprise. There's a lot of documentation in psychology around memory and waiting. And this happened to be a time when their customers would tend to drop off the experience and cancel their rides. So what Uber did was invest a lot of effort into how they could mitigate that. And through things like operational transparency, so providing a lot of great insight into how close your ride is to you, who that driver is, what are they driving, how the progress and how long it will take for them to get to you, and even the discovery of this information throughout the app being a lot more interactive and engaging, help to all kind of culminate in making the user experience overall much, much better. So Uber was able to kind of really invest in improving this peak moment of the experience. In this case, it was a negative peak, and really kind of improve it to improve the overall experience for customers. Now, once again, drawing upon design exercises or artifacts that closely relate to these psychology principles, I think in the case of Peak Enroll, journey maps is great because they're invaluable for providing a way for us designers to visualize how people use a product or service through a narrative of accomplishing a very specific task or goal. I love journey maps because you can really start to just break down and see exactly where these kind of peaks of the experience are. Now, once again, those can be emotional peaks or, positive emotional peaks or negative peaks. And then you can almost see that the qualitative kind of information that surrounds those peaks of the experience through things like, observational quotes or things like this. And then being able to even identify opportunities along the way as well. And most importantly, you also start to see that ending of the experience, what led up and what was the user's mind state around that end of the experience to really kind of inform where you can spend a lot of time or more time to improve the experience overall. And the last one I want to talk about from the book is Hick's Law, which states that the time it takes to make a decision increases with the number and the complexity of the choices available. Now, once again, very closely related to the psychology law here is this concept known as cognitive load, which generally refers to the amount of working memory resources. Now, within interaction design and digital design, it's referring to the amount of mental resources needed to understand and interact with an interface. Now, the way I like to kind of express cognitive load to people is through these two simple diagrams. So the first is depicting reaction time, which is proportionate to the amount of options available. Now, this could be like literal options, like a pricing table. It could also just be sheer amount of interface elements that you have to kind of mentally parse in order to determine what it is you're looking for. So this would be known in information architecture as, information sent, right? So the more things that you have to kind of process on the screen, the longer it's going to take for you to make a decision. And then in addition to this is this concept known as working memory buffer, which turns out it's very similar to the way computer RAM or computer memory is. So there's a finite amount of slots that are available to occupy with bits of information. And the more information that's, entered into this buffer, the less amount of information you begin to hold. And, once it gets kind of maxed out, you start to lose information. If an example of this is if you've ever walked into a room and by the time you got there, forgot completely why you set off to go to that room to begin with. The likelihood is that you were making a lot of decisions, mostly subconsciously along the way, and it required you to engage with your working memory buffer to the point where you were beginning to lose bits of information including the one that set you off on your journey to that room. Now, drawing upon examples, once again, some of my favorite come in the form of, universal remotes, which we're all probably familiar with. And these things are complex interfaces. Even if they're physical interfaces, they're pretty complicated. So much so that it's led to one of my favorite things on the internet known as grandparents remotes, where grandkids or sons and daughters have taped off all the unnecessary interface elements from a remote to help increase the decision time that their grandparents can make decisions and activate or interact with the button that they're actually looking for. Now, these controls stand in stark contrast to the controls that are becoming much more familiar with these days, which are, for example, here the Apple TV remote. And really, this is just exemplifying the fact that the less interface elements you have to interact with, the quicker you are to a decision time or time to task. And then moving into the digital environment, lots of really good examples there as well. But some of my favorite come in the form of onboarding, which is, obviously a very critical part of any service or application. Here I'm picturing, what you're greeted with when you sign in for the first time to Slack. And what's really great about this is that they don't take you through a guided tour of the entire application and expect for you to kind of, process all this information or understand it. What they do is very clever. It's called progressive onboarding. So they drop you into the application, and there's really only one thing you can do here, and that's respond to Slackbot. So you're in a safe sandbox environment. You can respond to Slackbot, and in the process, the thing you're learning here happens to be the core functionality of Slack itself, and that's messaging. And it's only once you've done this that you get introduced into these other portions of the application, additional features that you can take advantage of, and all the things that we're familiar with Slack. But what's interesting here is that they progressively build upon, simpler kind of tasks, which is much more aligned with how human beings learn new things, right? So we build upon pre-existing knowledge in kind of very layered ways. So, progressive onboarding is much more akin to how people actually learn new applications or learn new things in general. Another really good example of this comes in the form of the Google homepage, which has remained relatively unchanged since its entire existence. The reason for that is its simplicity. There's only one thing you can do here, and that's enter in a keyword. There's not much more to be distracted by or decisions you have to make. And it's only once you've entered a keyword and suggested, what it is you're interested in finding, that you get exposed to these additional buttons, these additional controls, these additional decisions that you have to make in order to narrow in on the bit of the information, the bit of the internet that you're looking to learn more about. So what's interesting about this is that they're really kind of reducing all the friction they possibly can to get past that initial moment of entering in a keyword, and really just kind of helping to kind of build upon, and reduce the cognitive load that people encounter when they're, having to parse a lot of information all at one time. Now, once again, tying this to design artifacts or exercises that are very relevant, I think here in the case of Hick's law, card sorting is great because it's great for figuring out how items should be organized according to people's mental models by having participants organize topics within groups that make the most sense to them. I can still remember the first time I was introduced to card sorting, and it kind of completely changed my perspective early on how design should be done. So as a designer, I could obviously use my own judgment on how, for example, a navigational system should be organized. Alternatively, I could, have participants or the people that will actually be using that menu organize these topics in a way that makes the most sense to them via a card sorting exercise, and then build the design around this kind of mental model that people have of the information itself. And I think that this is the core of what building intuitive, human-centered experiences is all about. So we've covered this intersection of psychology and design, and how designers can leverage these principles and laws from psychology to really kind of influence the way they design interfaces. It's also important that we talk about the ethical responsibility that comes with this. And it's kind of coincidental that we're talking about this right now. And, you have whistleblowers going to the United States Congress about Facebook. This is all very relevant and interrelated. It's critical that as designers, we consider how the products and services have the actual potential to undermine the goals of the people using them. I talk about this quite deeply in the book, but it really kind of originates with this thing, the Skinner box, aka the operant conditioning chamber. And this is really the beginning of behavioral psychology. This little contraption was used by psychologist B.F. Skinner to experiment on animals like rats and pigeons, and really see how he could shape their behavior through stimulating them, for example, with a light in the box, and then training them to pull a lever in order to receive a reward, in this case, food or water. What B.F. Skinner found was quite interesting in that he could shape compulsive behavior by basically varying the reward each and every time. So, sometimes the rat or the pigeon might get a lot of food. Sometimes it might get just a little bit and more water. Sometimes it might get neither. And what he found was that this kind of trained the animal to act compulsively and repeatedly pull the lever. Now, if you think about this and you apply this to the digital context, we see a lot of Skinner boxes happening all the time, right? A literal example of this, or a very direct example, could be the pull down the refresh pattern on Twitter, which, if you were to make the correlation between the Skinner box, we get varying rewards every time we do this. It might be a post that we're tagged in. It might be a photo from someone that we're following, or a tweet from someone that we admire. The point here is that it's always something different. And then there's an actual physical act, a gesture that's associated with it that can even become a bit compulsive. So this is an example of how digital technology could actually shape our behavior as human beings. Now, of course, that's not the only example. There's plenty more out there. One that we're all probably all too familiar with is this autoplay feature that you'll see in apps like YouTube or Netflix. And really, I think this kind of draws upon our kind of natural tendency to take the path of least resistance, right? And this kind of harkens back to the need for human beings to reserve our energy in order to survive, right? When we were hunters and gatherers, so these are kind of characteristics that are intrinsic to our species that have never gone away. They're still there, and digital patterns like autoplay can kind of sometimes, prey on or really kind of manipulate those kind of tendencies in our behavior. So in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with autoplay. It's actually quite handy, and you can, it saves you a few steps along the way, but it can also lead to you doing things that you didn't intentionally intend to do, like binge watching an entire season on Netflix. And this is yet another way that technology can begin to shape our actual behavior as human beings. Another, very common example I like to give about this is the like button that you find on apps like Facebook. It originated with Facebook, and now you can basically find it anywhere. And I think that it's really kind of the dopamine hit that we get from interacting with these kind of things, and receiving that kind of affirmation preys upon our needs as human beings to be accepted in our social groups, right? So in psychology, this is known as social affirmation. And, it's yet another way that technology can begin to kind of shape our behavior as humans by kind of manipulating our need for social affirmation or acceptance. I point all these out to highlight something really important in that, in the last decade or so, we've moved fast and we've broke things, perhaps too fast and broken too many things. And the science behind this, the research and how it's actually affecting people is finally beginning to catch up with us. I love pointing out this graph by Jesse Weaver, where he kind of talks about organizational focus over time, in that a team's focus begins to, it starts off focused very much on human-centered problems. We're trying to improve the lives of human beings. But over time, that could be, the need to grow as the team, to scale. Perhaps the product or service has been acquired and is constantly needing to kind of justify growth. These kind of organizational focuses begin to kind of shift over to more business-centered problems. And that can lead to some problems, right? So we have to begin to measure our success. And we begin to do that through things like daily active users or monthly active users, maybe time on page, or even time on site. These are all success metrics that very much are interested in the business success, right? So business-centered problems. What they're totally neglecting is the human-centered problems. This is just highlighting that quantitative data tells us lots of useful things, but it doesn't tell us why users are behaving a certain way or how a product is actually impacting their lives. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about really quickly is just, this is all great, psychology and how it intersects with design and, how we could potentially manipulate human behavior and what we should be kind of consciously aware of when doing so. But how do we apply this? How do we, operationalize these principles in our work? I think it's important that we consider how we can internalize and apply psychology principles and then articulate them back to our team through things like design principles. One of my absolute favorite things from the Laws of UX project is seeing people adorn their spaces with posters that I make available via the website. And this to me is a signal that, people are having discussions about these laws, these principles, and really talking about how they have how they're impacting their own design decisions. And this is certainly one way to operationalize psychology within the design process. I think a much more effective way, and what I go into a bit more detail in the book, is design principles. So design principles are pretty fantastic because they help us to kind of codify the values that we have as a team that we share in very actionable statements if they're done right. So here's an example of a design principle, very generic, but it says that we will value clarity over abundance of choice. Now, this is already heading in a good direction because it's drawing a very clear line in the sand. We're not saying that clarity is what we value. We're saying we value it even over abundance of choice. Abundance of choice could be an equally valid design principle. So this is already much more actionable. And then it's validated or reinforced by a psychology law, in this case, Hicks law. So according to Hicks law, we know that the time it takes to make a decision increases with the number and the complexity of the choices available. So now we have a principle, we have a law. The only thing we're missing is that tactical kind of application. What do we need to do specifically that ladders up to this principle? And just an example that I give in the book is in order to achieve this, we must A, limit choices to no more than 3 items at a time, and B, provide brief explanations when useful that are clear and no more than 80 characters. Now, it's important to note here that this is just a generic principle, a generic example. The ones that you would create would be done in tandem with your team and be very specific to the product or service you're building. But it serves as a great example of how all these kind of concepts and laws from psychology can come together to be more operationalized within your design process. And I talk about these and a lot more in my book, Laws of UX, Using Psychology to Design Better Products and Services. And it's available in lots of places. So thank you so much.
Jon, thank you so much. That was fantastic. It was great to have you talk in detail about some of those laws. If you have a question for Jon, please do ask it in the chat. And even better still, why not send us a direct message? And if selected, we'll give you the link and you can join us here on screen. We do have copies of Jon's book to give away. We've got a few more. We've given away one already. We've got a few more to go. So stay tuned to see if you are a winner of one of those books. Jon, before we get into some of the questions from the audience, I just want to ask you, like building up this list and creating this wonderful list of laws, it takes time. And how did you get into this? How did this become a defining moment at this stage in your career that you created this book? So tell me about the history. What led to this?
This is a great story. So I actually, it was probably one of the biggest projects in my career to date at that moment in time. And it, back in, I believe it was 2017, but like mid 2017, and it was for a big automotive company. And it was an interesting project in that I didn't have, I was coming in as a consultant to a team. So I was coming from externally and didn't have a lot of data provided to really kind of validate design decisions, and as a designer, we know data is quintessential to what we do, right? But I was kind of coming in fresh and having to make a lot of design decisions without that data to really kind of reinforce what I was suggesting should change in the design. And so what I started to do is kind of do a lot of research on how I could validate design decisions and kind of started to draw back on these psychology concepts that I learned back in college and was familiar with, but had never really put too much thought into, and realized that it was incredibly, effective in helping me communicate my design decisions. And that was kind of the origins of that. Once I started doing that research, I realized really quickly that there wasn't a lot of great resources out there on the web that really helped to kind of make this intersection between psychology and design clear. And so, like I said in the beginning of the talk, I really wanted to create that resource I was looking for, make a much more designer-friendly resource that made it very clear and, applicable to how psychology can be applied to the design process. And that was the origins of it. Yeah. Now, luckily on that project, we were able to, once we had a kind of a MVP, like a prototype in place, we were able to circle back, do usability studies, and I was able to get that data that I was looking for. And in most cases, it kind of validated a lot of the design decisions I had made and had kind of made with these psychology concepts kind of guiding me along the way. So I realized that it could be, super valuable for other designers as well.
That's fantastic. And I really like the way you get the last example of taking the laws and applying them to the design principles, which I'm sure we've all worked on design principles, but bringing them all back in, I think is pretty incredible. I'm going to bring Rick in as well. Rick, you've been listening in the background, and I'll pass it over to you, Rick. Any comments? Any questions?
Yeah, Jon, I'd love to know. I mean, you mentioned just now how huge a project this was for you. Or certainly the work you put into the book. I noticed also in your title slide, in your intro slide, you referred yourself as a writer, whereas now you're an author, and I'm wondering how that changes your view of yourself as a designer and a professional.
Yeah, I think that kind of the core of what we do as designers is take information and then communicate it back in a way that is much more kind of accessible for people to understand things that are potentially a lot, very complex, and that could be through words. It could also be through interfaces. The point is that we're kind of working within constraints and then kind of articulating that back through an interface. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that's always been interesting to me is how articulating problems and writing about them, and then working through a potential solution, it's all interrelated to design in a lot of ways. So I was hesitant. I've done quite a bit of writing in the past in the form of like blog posts and that kind of thing. But realized that through the process of doing all this writing and then eventually writing publishing this book with O'Reilly, that it was time to kind of like own that a little bit, and it was kind of synonymous with being a designer, is being able to articulate through words, concepts and things that are potentially very abstract. So, yeah.
We have some questions coming through on our YouTube channel. So I'm just going to go to Paul. Let's bring this one up here. A question for Jon. What would you say is the most common psychological blind spot you've come across in your design work or research to date? Thanks in advance. So your most common psychological blind spot that you've come across.
That's an interesting one. I think the one that I see most commonly is that, designers assume that they don't need to validate their work through usability testing or user interviews. That qualitative kind of feedback that I think is important. In some ways, there's this myth of the creative person that can use their intuition to design things that are spectacular. They go behind a curtain or go up to the mountain and come down with the perfect solution. And I think that that's a huge blind spot, because it's almost kind of cultivated in some ways in academia and that kind of thing, or art schools, and this myth of the creative can be quite misleading. I actually think that design is much more of a collaborative process, that that the people that will use the products or services that we're building have much more of a voice in informing what that design looks like. And psychology principles are just a medium for us in some ways to articulate or understand what people are saying when they're giving us their feedback.
Great. We got some comments in here about people's favorite laws. I did pose the question, are there any popular ones out there? And David Cook is commenting here that mental models, so much of becoming a running joke in their teams. So David, yeah, mental models. And I know Lied very well. Lied, welcome. Parkinson's law. Any task will inflate to fill the available time. I can relate to that one. I'm a procrastinator because I will fill all available time. So I leave things to the last minute. I know it's going to take an hour, so I'll do it an hour beforehand. Otherwise, I'll be doing things for absolute weeks. You know what? I'm going to bring Flavian in. Flavian, you're part of our backstage crew. So Flavian, you're very welcome on the spot. I want to just go out to our social media, out to Twitter. Any comments coming through on Twitter? Any questions coming through to us?
Yes, I was hoping that she would join us on live, but we have 2 questions from April Mayer. So the first question she has is for Jon, and she asks, which law of UX do you think is the most underappreciated?
That's a good question. I think that one that doesn't get talked about a lot, but has huge implications to the work that we do is Tesla's law, which really Tesla's law states that it also known as the law of conservation of complexity, that complexity has to be dealt with in some form or another. There's a certain amount of complexity that can't be removed from any kind of system or product or service. And really the question becomes how you manage that. So do you internalize it and it becomes part of the complexity of the product that you are building? In this case, the team itself takes on that complexity, or is it complexity that you kind of pass on to the user? This is the kind of thing that people are much more kind of akin to talking about, okay, how do people what's the psychology principles or laws that affect how people interact with an interface. But it's important as well to talk about the psychology around our own workflows and our own teams and how we manage things like complexity and where that ends up going within the product, because it all ends up impacting, you know, the end user, the end customer as well.
Thanks very much. Do we have time for another question from April, or you want to
go for it? Yes, we've got a couple of moments left, 2 minutes or so.
Her other question is, how do you determine when a new law has emerged?
Yeah, I mean, that's also a good question. I think that you know, there's just an endless trove of, as designers, we're very fortunate in that psychology, this field of psychology, predates the work we've been doing for a very, very long time. So there's always new things that are happening in the field of psychology that can be drawn upon to inform how we can design better, you know, experiences and that kind of thing. I think that new laws, it really, I have a tendency to look back at, you know, what's happening in the field of psychology. I think some of the biggest changes in psychology that have happened as of recent decades has been this concept of cognitive biases and how that impacts how people interact with interfaces and how people really make decisions. So, you know, a lot of the things that I've translated into laws of UX has been things that have been around for quite a long time. And, you know, I think that that's, you know, probably a good thing, because really they've had time to work themselves. They transcend technology itself, right? These are timeless concepts that aren't kind of trends or aren't going to go away. They're kind of integral to who we are as human beings and how we process the world and information. So, yeah, you know, I haven't seen very many new laws pop up while I've been working on this project, and I don't anticipate that will be the case either. I mean, a lot of what is out there is very timeless.
I think that's the essence. It is timeless. It goes back to the craft of our human-centered design, isn't it? Really, this has evolved, but the essence of it has remained the same. What we call UX was not called UX before. What we call something different in 10, 20 years' time, but the fundamentals remain the same. Jon, we're at time. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out over your lunch today to speak with the Dublin UX audience. It's been fascinating. It's been a pleasure having you part of our broadcast today, and I'm so honored that you were able to speak to us. So I really appreciate it. So thank you very, very much. Yes, we've got a lot of comments. I'm going to play those comments in the end credits. We've got a lot of great comments coming through. And Rick, best of luck with Belfast UX. Continued success. We'll be watching with interest, and of course we'll be tweeting out all the wonderful events that you'll be running as well. So thank you so much as well. Jon, Rick, we'll say goodbye at this point. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fabian, we've got one more thing to do. We've got to give away some books. We've got no one wants to come online, so what we'll do is we'll give the books away to those who have entered our competition beforehand. So let's see what we have here. Right, let's bring up the randomizer and let's have a look and see. The next winner of our book is Daniel. Daniel, very well done. Nice big cup of tea or coffee there, and your picture from our meetup. Congratulations. We've got more books to give away. Let's see who's next. Sabina, congratulations. I'll be in touch with your book. And let's see, do we have any more? James, very well done. A book is coming your way as well. And let's see, I think we may have one more. Megan, very well done. A book is coming your way as well. The talk today will be available immediately on demand on our Rewind channel, which is rewind.wux.ie, or the link you have here. You can replay this as many times as you wish. You can join us on network@dublinux.ie, network@dublinux.ie. We're going to be hanging out there for the next 20-30 minutes, and if you want to hang out with some fellow Dublin UXers. I'm looking at a comment that came on Twitter, someone having their dinner saying they're enjoying their food at home, and it's almost as if they were at one of the Indeed locations or the HubSpot building where we've had events before. And yeah, Flavien, I hope we get to do it again in person. I think getting back and having that social interaction is, I think, is essential, isn't it, really? But I think hybrid is where we will continue to evolve this. That is us. So with that, Flavien, thank you so much for helping out in the background. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Patrick. No problem.
No, and we will round it out. So thank you so much. Continue to engage on network@dublinux.ie. And that is it. Until the next time, I believe our next event is going to be November 4th. So it's only about a month away will be our next event. So we hope to see you there. Until then, take great care, stay safe, and talk soon.